Evening everyone, this is Shadi Abu Yusuf, and today I'll be talking about classroom management again, but this time we'll be covering actually grouping. So we're going to start by talking about why pairing students and grouping students are really important in a classroom, and then we're also going to talk about how we can pair and group students effectively when teaching adults. And from there, we're going to move to watch also some video clips taken from classes where I teach a group of adult students. And we're going also to see how to group students and pair them effectively. And then from there, we're going to talk about professional courses like CELTA and how grouping can affect your grading on such courses, right? So let's see. Now, when we say that grouping is really important, it is because, number one, it develops the students' speaking skills. So again, it is very important to give the students an opportunity to speak in the English classroom because we believe in communicative teaching. We want the students to be able to speak in English when they leave their English classrooms. That's why they come to learn English in the first place. And again, pairing them and grouping them actually increase their opportunities of speaking in a classroom, because when you put them in pairs, they speak together and they check their answers together and they review questions together. And also when you group them, they're encouraged and they speak more. So the first reason why grouping and pairing students are really important is because of the speaking, right? Another reason why we believe that grouping students is really important is also because it makes them confident when using English language. What do we mean by this? Again, one of the problems why a lot of students are unable to use English in reality is because they're kind of afraid of using English. And they don't want people to make fun of the mistakes. They don't want people to judge their language. But again, the beauty of group work and pair work, that when the students start working together, they feel more confident. It's because students, their friends are at the same level, so they don't feel anxious. And that's why it makes them more confident. And also, changing the partners all the time, it builds their confidence, because they speak with a different person and then they move to a different partner and then they move to a third partner. And that makes them able to face a lot of people with their English language. So that's another reason why we believe that grouping and pairing the students are very important. Now, also it supports team spirit, right? We would love our students to work together. We would like our students to cooperate and work together and support one another and give each other's feedback, because it's very healthy in the classroom and also in reality. So when the students leave the classroom, they leave also with principles of supporting one another and helping people working with them in the same team. So that's also another benefit of grouping students and getting them to work in pairs. Another also reason that it provides the students with a safe environment. What do we mean by a safe environment here? It's because, as I said before, it's always worrying talking to the teacher, because the teacher is the most professional speaker in the classroom. And the students don't want to be judged by the teacher. They don't want the teacher to listen to the language and pick their errors. And that makes them anxious all the time when they're talking to the teachers. But it's not the same scenario when they're talking to the friends. Because when they talk to the friends, why would they care? Simply, they are the friends, they are at the same level. And this actually encouraged them to speak more. And it makes them feel safer, and that helps, of course, because again, when the level of anxiety is less, the level of production is higher, and vice versa, right? And also, it makes lessons more interesting. Well, think of some of the classes that you used to study before. and when the teacher is speaking all the time and you're doing nothing. Well, I still remember when I was at some stages of my educational background that some teachers used to talk just all the time. And I used to sit like doing nothing, and it was really boring. We don't want this to happen in our classes. We want students to be interested. We want classes to be fun, right? So again, let them speak and share, exchange ideas. You're encouraging them to speak. Actually, it's more interesting. It's not a boring class. And finally, it helps the teacher with the open class feedback. So it's not only about also students, it even helps you as a teacher. So a teacher might ask, but Shadi, how come that grouping would help me as a teacher in giving the students feedback? Because let's imagine this situation here. That you don't get the students to work in pairs and groups. You just give them the activity, and then you move from the activity, you jump from the activity to the plenary feedback or the open class feedback. What happens? Students didn't have a chance to check their answers together and to compare their answers. So they start asking you a lot of questions. But when the students work together first, before the feedback, what happens is that stronger students would help weaker students, and they will give them help with some tricky points in the activity. And this will help you so much with the feedback, because now during the feedback, you will be focusing on the most difficult points and you wouldn't be discussing a lot of things. So again, it's helpful as well. And one last thing to say, it reduces your TTT as a teacher. So you don't speak all the time, because we know that the more we have TTT in the classroom, the less we have STT. So the more teacher talk time, the less student talk time. And again, who deserves to speak more in the English language classroom? Students, because they need to practice more than the teacher, because the teacher is the most professional person in a classroom, right? Good. Now, let's come to the second part of today's video, which is how can we pair and group students effectively? And let me give you some tips here, some pieces of advice. I'd say number one, think about practicality. What does that mean? I mean, think about the space you have in your classroom, the number of the students in your classroom. For example, imagine that you have a small classroom, and I'm talking about the space here, and then you have 30 students in a small classroom, and then you say, I will ask my students to have a whole class mingle. Come on, for God's sake, give me a break. Hey, how are you going to get the whole class to stand and move around as if it were a party when you have 30 students in a very, very small classroom? So always be practical about your imaginations when it comes to pairing and grouping students. That's very important. Always think about the space you have. If you want to divide your classroom into big groups, do you actually have a good space for these big groups so that these groups can be a bit far from one another, so students can focus on what they're doing? Or it will be very difficult for students to focus because they will be too close. So again, think about such things when you're also planning your lessons. And second thing, be assertive. What do we mean by be assertive? When we say be assertive, we want you to have a commanding voice and a smiling face. So let me say this one more time. Have a commanding voice and a smiling face. So don't show negative gestures to your students, but at the same time, you're the teacher, you're the leader. You want your students to do the activity. So it's not enough to say something like, okay, I want you to work together, work in pairs, and you're sitting at your own place, and then do nothing. And then what would happen? That students will start looking at each other, and then they do nothing. It's because you're not assertive enough, especially if this is the first time you teach this group. You will be a bit, embarrassed somehow, you need to say, okay, I want you to work together. Go on, come on, move your seats, turn around. So you've got to have a commanding voice, encouraging voice. Don't only say work in pairs and you're sitting at your own desk and then students don't work in pairs, right? So be assertive. Also, use the right gestures. Try to develop some gestures, some hand gestures with your students during your classroom so that they understand you when you want them to work in pairs. So you can go like this, and then students understand how you want them to work in pairs. You don't even have to say it. You just go, they understand. Just from your hands gestures. Why? Because you develop these gestures with them. You used these gestures once, twice, and then now students know what you mean by them. You want them to work in groups, so you give them a sign like this one or whatever. Use the hand gestures that you like, as long as they're culturally appropriate, right? And one last piece of advice here is use different ways of pairing and grouping. Try to make your class interesting by using different ways of grouping your students and pairing them. So don't use the same ways all the time. And we're going to show you some video clips about how to use different ways of pairing and grouping students. And this is going to be coming in today's episode. One last thing today, please don't forget to change the partners. Don't keep the same partners working together during the whole hour or the whole 2 hours, eh? It's boring. Change the partners in the classroom. Get students to work in different groups, to work with different partners. Get them, to face different people. It's really important. You don't want your classes to be boring, right? So please do this. Now let's move to some video clips that would show you some of the ideas that I discussed earlier. Let's have a look at these videos. Okay everyone, so what I want you to do, I want you to work with your partner. Tell your partner about which countries you would like to visit in the future and why. So, two things, what are they? Countries you would like to visit and why? Wonderful. So work together. Okay everyone, so what I want you to do, I want you to work with your partner. Tell your partner about which countries you would like to visit in the future and why. So, how many things are we going to talk about? Two. First, and why. Wonderful. So, I want the three of you together to turn around a bit. And both of you together. Good. Okay, everybody, now I want you to speak as one group, a group of 5. Speak about which countries you would like to visit and why. Okay, okay? Okay, so start. Go on.
Okay, lots of countries actually.
Okay, everybody, now I want you to work, as one group. Talk about the countries you would like to visit in the future and why. So how many things?
2.
Number 1?
Which countries?
And?
Why?
Very good. So one group. Now please, one circle. Move around. Give me a circle. Now start.
Why I want to go to Paris.
So everybody, now you'll be talking to your manager on the phone. Try to tell your manager about the latest updates you heard from your friend in the previous activity. Okay? So, what would be the main topic of the phone call? The latest
Updates.
Very good. So, can you stand up, please? Okay, let's change the chair. I want you to sit back to back. So, can you do this here? Wonderful. Now you start. Imagine it's a phone call. Start normally. Go on. Come on.
Hello. How are you?
So, okay everyone, let's change the partners. So, Fatima, can you have a seat over there? Okay, wonderful. So, both of you together, and please, the three of you together. Come on. Okay, so, everyone will get a card, right? And then you show your card to your friends, right? And sit next to the person holding the same card. Wonderful. Someone will have a joker here. If you've got the joker, you choose the pair you want to work with. So show your cards to your friends and sit next to each other. Okay, so as a joker, who will you work with? Okay, wonderful. So the three of you together and both of you together. Wonderful. Now everybody, I want you to stand. 3 on my right, 3 on my left. So try to hold the end of the rope. Okay, choose only one for each. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. Don't want you to pull so hard. I will leave my hand. Don't pull so hard. I will leave my hand and then find your partner. Okay? Find your partner. Oh yeah. Sit next to each other now. Go on. Right, wonderful. Yeah, right. Good, lovely. Now let's move to professional courses. Is grouping important on professional courses? Let's say, of course. And again, as we do all the time, let's take the CILTA as an example here. Okay, is grouping mentioned in the CILTA criteria upon which candidates would be assessed? Yes, it is. Like, let's have a look together. So, criterion 1A, teaching a class with an awareness of the needs and interests of the learner group. And then in the explanation of this criterion, it says, use this information when setting up pair and group work and dealing with the students in open class where appropriate. Now let's think about this. Teaching a class with an awareness of the needs and interests. Yes, because remember, students need to work together. Students need to work in groups. They don't need only to be listening to the teacher. You know those teachers who keep talking all the time in the classroom, leaving no time to their students at all. Okay, come on, for God's sake, remember what your students need, and they need to work together. They need to work in groups. They need to practice the language. So that's one criterion here where grouping is mentioned. But not only one criterion. Let's read the second one, which is 1B. Teaching a class with an awareness of learning styles and cultural factors that may affect learning. Yes, of course, learning style. How is learning style important when you're grouping students? Because again, not all the students can sit and receive a lecture for 2 hours. Well, I don't think, those students who can take up 2 lectures just sitting like that interested for a whole 2 hours when one person is speaking. Come on, no. Please, right? think about learning styles as well. And sometimes you need to talk, sometimes students need to talk, sometimes students need to watch a video, sometimes students need to listen to an audio. So make your classes interested, and group and pair work, okay? These are related to this point, right? Now, let's read also another criterion, which is 1C, acknowledging when necessary learners' backgrounds and previous learning experiences. And this is also related to group work and pair work. If you have a very dominant student, and you know that this student would not leave a chance to the other students to speak, don't put that student with a very weak student. So this weak student wouldn't be given any opportunity to speak at all. So you need to be careful, okay? You need to understand your students and their experiences and the learning background. So you might feel that, oh yeah, that's a strong student. I will put this strong student with a weaker student, because I know that this stronger student is helpful and he would help his partner. So again, bear this also in mind when you're grouping your students. And one final criterion here is 5B, which says openly, setting up whole class and or group or individual activities appropriate to the lesson type, okay? And this is explained, organize the learners in pair, group, individual and plenary work. Again, as we said, it is very, very important to use group work and pair work, because without them, your lesson will be really boring, because it will be completely teacher-centered. And we don't want this. We want students to work in the classroom. We want them to enjoy learning. We want them to practice speaking. So please, don't make your classes traditional. Don't make your classes boring. Again, I guess we came to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much. And remember, you can always visit my blog, www.shadi.blog. You can always leave me an email on the following address, me@shadi.blog. And don't forget, if you like this video, don't forget to press like, leave a comment, activate notifications, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. Bye bye.